Welcome to This Is You, the podcast. As our journeys unfold, so do our identities. What makes you, you? This podcast explores how different life experiences, concepts, or themes like friendship, religion, loneliness impact how we see ourselves and the world. Join me on this journey as we talk to new guests and learn about their life experiences, reflect on our own, and see what it means for all of us going forward. Your journey to learn more begins now. Jenn Taylor is a mom of 18 kids. She's also a blogger, a virtual assistant, a runner, and a minimalist. About 3 years ago, Jenn wrote a book that described her experiences growing up in dysfunction, as well as tools and tricks that she learned on how to deal with those experiences. In her story, she talks about 3 people who've really influenced the way she views the world. Her 3rd grade teacher, her mother, and someone she lovingly refers to as her adopted dad. In this special 2-part episode, part 1 focuses on those 3 people, how it influenced her parenting and setting boundaries, how she feels about being your child's friend versus being their parent, as well as her blended family and the experiences that she's had with raising 18 kids. Listen in to hear how even the smallest acts of kindness can really affect and shape someone, especially when they're struggling.
Well, I was raised in dysfunction, and basically, if you think about a foster kid and anything a foster kid goes through, that's how I grew up. And my parents divorced when I was 6, and from then on, things got considerably worse. I was in the very end of 2nd grade, and I remember having a 2nd grade teacher that I remember thinking she was mean. She probably wasn't mean, but my parents got divorced. I thought it was my fault. I was the oldest of 2 kids. I was really struggling with it. My mom worked full time. We became latchkey kids. This is back in 1976. Things were considerably different as far as how all that worked. And the next year I went into 3rd grade, and Carolyn St. Jean was my teacher, and she is the person that I am the most thankful for in my life.
Yeah.
Life at home got much worse once I was 9. So when I met her, things were really tough, and they were starting to get very bad. But there was much worse coming. And she was so pivotal. I knew I was smart. I was beautiful. I was worth it. Loved going into class. She used to give us a little, either we could pick a peppermint or a butterscotch mint every Friday if we got, all green lights, right?
Yeah.
Remember back in 3rd grade, the green light and everything. If you were green all week, you got to do that. And my sister at that point was in kindergarten, and I would ask her, can I take a second one for my sister? Because I always got the mint, because I loved her class, right? I always got it. And I took the peppermint, and I always asked if I could take one for my sister, and she always told me yes. And just the fact that she trusted that I wasn't hoarding candy or trying to get more for myself. And I always got a butterscotch, which I actually don't like them, but I would give that to my sister. And it was things like that. She did the play The Nutcracker that year, and I was cast as the princess.
Aww.
And the exciting thing is I met her, I found her. She was still teaching 3rd grade at the same school. She'd moved around and come back. And I found her, and I reached out to her, and this summer, it's 20 years ago. So I was 28, I was pregnant then, and I flew back with 5 kids and pregnant. I lived in Alaska. I flew back to Rhode Island, where I was raised, and I spent the weekend with her. I went to her class, we took the kids, I went to her house, and I had the chance to tell her thank you.
Yeah.
She was a huge reason why, although as a kid you can't put these things into words, but these were my learning experiences. I got a little older and I put it together. I knew that you could make a tremendous difference in the life of another person in passing without ever realizing that you did anything.
Yeah.
And how huge is that?
I think it's actually the power, right? Because that gives you incentive to then be nice in general, because you never know what type of impact you're having on someone. And when that comes from a genuine place, other people feel that energy too. What do you think it was about what she did that helped you through a difficult time? So what was going on in your life at that time?
My parents were getting divorced. So back then in the 70s, things were different. So I had a single mom who had married really young, had me young, was recapturing those college years.
Yeah.
So there was a revolving door of dating. There was alcohol. There were drugs. My life went from like this 2 parents at home, and they didn't argue, and having this fairly normal life, to this whirlwind of feeling like as a kid my mom was kind of partying and dating a lot.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that she was dating. I mean, I had a lot of headaches at that point because things were so in upheaval for me, and I felt like it was my fault as a little kid. So I would wake up in the middle of the night having headaches, and she's having sex on the couch. I mean, I got to the point where I knew how long it would take based on the sounds that were being made. You know, like, oh, it'll be about. So I could ask her for Tylenol for my headache to go to bed. My sister was having hallucinations and nightmares and fevers and thinking monstrous spiders were going to eat her. And I felt very responsible to help get her through those things.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of felt like we felt on the back burner and that there were other things important. So, you know, you go from having parents to being this latchkey kid and getting babysat and having this revolving door of men that she's dating. And these weren't like quality men. So that's the other issue. You know, we were robbed several times. These were guys that were just total sleaze bags where as a little kid, you just know you stay away from that person.
Yeah.
And my mom dated men that were abusive verbally and physically. And it was a real struggle. So that's what was going on when I went into Carolyn's class. And, you know, what did she do? She didn't do anything. She was absolutely 100% herself. When I went back 20 years ago and met her, she did not remember me. We pulled out pictures and someone said, oh, that must have really hurt your feelings. And I was like, no, it's better.
Yeah.
I wasn't some sad, lost kid that she was singling out, like this poor kid needs so much extra. She was being a teacher, which I think is incredible. And she was just being a kind human being, which I think is incredible. She was just being her. She wasn't treating me differently than anybody else in the class necessarily. I just so desperately needed what she was giving. I fell into her class at a time in my life where I really needed that. I didn't feel worth it. I felt scared. I didn't feel smart. I was such a lost little 7-year-old kid, and I was struggling, and she had no idea. And I think that's so much better because, again, it drives home the fact that you can make such a huge difference in the life of a kid. I mean, it was 41 years ago. I've carried it since then because I know what a difference we can make in someone's life, even in passing, even if we never hear about it. And it's just by being us. It's not by doing anything exceptional or going above and beyond. It's just by being you. And that's what she did to me. She's an amazing human being that probably saved me.
It sounds a lot like she provided a safe place for you because home was not safe. Not just emotionally, but physically and in all sorts of ways. There was no safety with home. But when you were in her classroom, not only was it safe, but you knew what to expect. Where there was consistency, stability, and also it sounds like a teacher who gave you that attention. It's not like attention in like overly focused on you, but just like she saw you. Like you were there. And sometimes that small thing, seeing a person and recognizing this is a person who has thoughts and ideas and just treating them like a person when they're not really being treated that way in other aspects of their life, that has such a huge impact.
Huge. It's enormous. And I think all of us want to be seen, and not just seen, but we want to be seen for ourselves or for the person that we might become. Isn't it great to be seen as the best version of yourself? And she just saw me as the best version of myself. There wasn't a question. And I wanted to be the best version of myself.
Yeah.
Because of that.
And the mints and the butterscotch. No, but I know.
And the mints. And then I got mints every Friday.
I mean, you can't argue with the mints, right? The mints are amazing. It's actually interesting because when I was in middle school, I also had a teacher like that. I think some of my household were actually pretty stable, but I was going through a lot emotionally at the time. And I was really, you're in the preteen years, like 12, 13, 14, that type of age range, where a lot about what you think and believe starts to shift, right? You're having a lot of self-discovery at that time. And I think I wasn't totally comfortable at home talking about all of the different extreme emotions that I was having. And this teacher, he really encouraged us to write, and we wrote poetry and all of that type of stuff. And so he actually knew a lot of my deepest, darkest feelings. He would read these poems that I would write and give me feedback on them. And like when he looked at me, I knew he could see me and accepted me. And it's not love, but it's like I felt that who I was good. I didn't feel like, oh, I shouldn't share this or I shouldn't share that, or like there's something wrong with me for feeling this way. He just looked at me and saw me and embraced that person, you know? And I feel like that's so important when you're not really sure how you feel about yourself. And so I hear you with the teacher thing. I feel like teachers can have such a profound difference on how we see the world and how we then go throughout it. Because she set up a model for you. Having 18 kids, I'm sure you've had to deal with lots of different personalities and lots of different things. But she sort of set the example of what that could look like for you.
I think being a parent is the hardest thing you can ever do. It's not a mom thing or a dad thing. It's just a parenting thing. You know, you have all of this hope and this joy and this life that you're bringing into the world. And it doesn't go quite like you imagined.
No, it never does.
Always, no. And it is a lot of work and it's really hard. And I wanted to do foster care, and I did foster care for 12 years because I thought if I could just make a difference in one life the way she made in my life, if I could just do that for one kid, make one kid feel that way. Because on their rap sheet, I'd been through everything that these kids have been through, different levels of severity. But by the time I got to high school, I had been raped, I'd been molested, I'd been hit, I'd been kicked out. We didn't have money. We were way below poverty. You know, it wasn't like there wasn't food, but there wasn't really food. So I had experienced everything these foster kids had been through. I remember CPS coming to the house at one point when I was probably 10 or 11, and she drove away, and I looked out the window wondering why she was leaving, and we were staying. It didn't make it like this is not an okay situation. Yeah. So that's what I mean. Like, I had this teacher in third grade. Things got much worse after that, but I knew to her I was worth it.
Yeah.
I knew that. It wasn't okay, but I was okay with my self-worth and my self-esteem and my confidence because I knew to her I was worth it. And so that's what I mean about taking that and carrying it with you and changing the trajectory. It made me feel more untouchable by the other things that happened in my life because I had her.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, knowing you can make a huge difference. And then on top of that, knowing there are other kids going through exactly what I went through.
Yeah.
And I could make a difference to them. Now, it is the hardest thing you'll ever do, parenting, but it's also the most worthwhile. And that was 18 kids. I mean, of those 18, 5 were adopted and 5 aged out, were long-term foster kids, essentially. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not the exact breakdown, but those 5 extra kids that kind of came and never left. Mm-hmm. And then the 5 that I adopted, and then 8 that are biological. And so I wanted to make a difference to someone the way she made a difference to me. And that's a huge part. People ask me a lot if it's religion. Are you Catholic? Are you Catholic or Mormon? No, that was not the catalyst behind this. The catalyst behind this was that somebody completely changed my life. And then I had the ability to not only not perpetuate the cycle that I was raised in, I had the ability to change it and do my best to make a difference in the lives of others. And that was her. She did that.
Yeah. Having 18 kids and going through this process, did that change what you thought about your own experience with your own mom in terms of how you viewed it, becoming a parent yourself? And did that impact your relationship, or is there a relationship there?
There was no relationship with my dad, and he passed away 17 and a half years ago. And that was one of those things people were like, oh, I'm so sorry, don't be. I was relieved. He was a very mean, angry, abusive alcoholic, and I saw him 5 or 6 times from the time I was 6 to the time he died. And I'm glad it was limited to that, and it was awful. So that was a relief, and I had no relationship with him. My mom, I've always had kind of an odd, strange relationship. And again, it's my perspective. Hers might be completely different, but I felt like she needed me to be her therapist, which was not appropriate. And there were issues of depression and addiction and really abusive relationships. And when I gave birth, the funny thing is that I was told I would never be able to have children.
Really?
So, yeah, and I actually went through infertility, and I got pregnant the first time. And when Brianna was born at that moment, I think I lost respect. Where where you want to have a relationship with your parents and, you look up to them and you want to be worth it to your parents. It doesn't matter how terrible they are. You think, why am I not enough? Why am I not for you to get your act together? And this could be so different. And it really isn't about that. And you realize that, or I realized that a very long time ago. But I gave birth to my daughter, who's now 27. And I realized at that moment that it's a love you can never describe. Never. I have no word to describe that feeling. And it was the same for me when I adopted them. There was no difference. When you are handed a child and told that child is yours, there's a switch that flips within you, for me anyway. And I lost respect for her allowing us to go through the things that we went through. Yeah. Having said that, I was divorced, and it was not a great situation. It wasn't the same situation at all. Yeah. But I know that you can have two great parents that stay married and love each other and still have kids that come out with some baggage. You can't protect your kids from all of that. And there are situations that are not that great. And looking back, there are things that I would do different. But with parenting, I showed up and gave 150%. Some days that looks like a fraction. Other days that looks like I'm knocking it out of the park. Yeah. But my relationship with my mom, yes. When I had kids, I just thought, how? Yeah. It made me hurt all over again, because then I understood what her connection to me should have been, and I think was. Yeah. And yet, here we are. Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. It's almost like the love that you feel is so intense, and you think, how could she not have felt that? Or how could she not have wanted better for me than what she gave in the end, right? Because you can't imagine doing that to this beautiful kid that you're looking at, and this love that you're feeling, this overwhelming feeling that you have. So I get it. I get that perspective. And I think the part that, for me, in my experience, so my mother and I have like a pretty good relationship, I would say. I think having a kid made me realize how hard it is to have a kid. And also that, like becoming an adult doesn't mean you know all the answers. I think I thought, like, how come you don't know, or how come you can't help me, or how come whatever. And now I have a lot more perspective to realize how complicated that is. And especially if your kid is different from you, it's really hard to then understand how do you meet them where they are. And especially in my parents' generation too, I mean, they never had parents who met them where they were. Like, this was not a thing. So I think, like, what I wanted from her was something she never had before. And I think when I try to do that for my son, I find how hard it is to do it. So it's shifted how I see that piece and how complicated that piece is. But I can also see from your perspective, it also makes you think, like, how could you do certain things that you did? She sort of left you to be the adult. You were taking care of your sister. You played that adult sort of role instead of the child role, which you should have been allowed to play, while you were a kid. And I tried to reach out to her when I was little and tell her what was going on. And I wrote the book 3 years ago, so I was 45. It's not like all of a sudden I've had some epiphany. Yeah. But I think it's still my story of that time frame, and it's very accurate for me. Yeah. But I also know that she has her own story. Yeah. And I don't understand that. And I do know how hard it is to be a parent. But we have limited contact, and we have, I call it a strained relationship. Yeah. And I am more comfortable keeping it at very arm's length. And sometimes we have good conversations, and we go months and months and months and months, and like without texting or talking at all. Yeah. And that's fine for me. Yeah. Yeah. It also gave me the perspective that when my kids got older, and one of my girls really struggled a couple of years ago, and I just looked at her and I said, I get it. Maybe I'm not the mom that you wanted, or you're blaming me for everything. That's totally fine. I'm asking you to just show respect, and you can walk out of my life. You're an adult, and you absolutely have the ability to do that. If you're having difficulty because I'm your mom for whatever reason, just show me respect, and I'll show you respect, and just cut off contact. And that conversation actually made us have a great relationship, because I think it's easy, especially for girls and their moms, to have friction. And I just wanted my kids to know, if you grow up and you don't want contact, I mean, that's your prerogative, because you have your story, and maybe I don't understand it. I would rather meet you and try to understand it and figure out what that is and have a relationship. And I have a very good relationship with almost every one of those kids. But it went through that. Like you said, in junior high school, you go through your struggles. You turn 18, you think you know everything and you want to leave, and you're a jerk to your parents.
Yep.
We've gone through all of those things, and you try drugs and you get in trouble with the law, and I'm going to be your parent through all of that, and you're probably not going to like it.
Yeah.
But at some point, you know, I think as kids you get a little bit of perspective, but I've just been very forward with my kids. Yeah, I get it. Maybe you didn't choose me. I mean, I think we kind of do choose our situation. That's the other thing that maybe made me more understanding, is that I feel like I chose the life that I was given, the people in the place that I was born into. I think we have some control over that. And so if I knew ahead of time, or if I chose that, there was a reason. And I think we're here to teach and to learn, and a lot of times both. But yeah, I mean, to answer your original question, it's a strained relationship that I wish wasn't. And I also have the perspective to know there's a list of things my mother did that were very great. There are things that she gave me, love of music, you know, the ability to sing. And there are moments where she was very there for me and very present and very supportive. And that mom, I would have liked to have had a lot more of that, because I know in those moments it could have been different, but she was living her story too. The problem was that it really screwed up mine in the meantime. And so because of that, I'm a lot arm's length, and I think she is too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that that's okay.
You said when you had the conversation with one of your daughters, if you don't want to have a relationship, that's your prerogative. But it actually got better at that point. So how did it shift it, having that conversation?
I think when we, and I'm using the word confront, but not in a
confrontational way.
Right. Like when you address, is maybe that's a better way to say it. When you address a situation, especially a situation that's uncomfortable, with one of your kids who's now an adult, I feel like with my kids, I was never their friend. I'm not there to be their friend. I am 100% their parent. We will have the best time in the whole world, and I will be a fun parent right up until you cross my line. And then you will definitely remember I'm not your friend, I'm your parent. So I didn't parent my kids in a way that I was their buddy. I had friends that were my age that were appropriate.
Those were your buddies.
My kids are not there to be my friend. However, they turn 18, they move out, there's a shift where you're not really parenting anymore and you're not really friends, but it's a sort of hybrid.
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with her where I addressed the elephant in the room, and that's her story. But I said, you know, there's a situation, and I'm not going to not say anything, and I'm not talking to you as your mom, and I'm not talking to you as your friend, because in this situation, I'm neither. I feel disrespected, and I have no tolerance for dishonesty and disrespect, and my kids have grown up knowing that. And I would appreciate it, since you feel disrespect towards me, for you to just remain very quiet about it and cut off contact with me. Because in this situation, I felt like if you're angry with me or you have an issue with me or whatever that is, and I've heard about it from an outside source, you need some separation. So I offered that as an option. I understand how you might feel. I am not thrilled with your follow through, and I am absolutely okay if you just don't want contact with me. And this would be a really good time for us to just break contact. And she started crying, and she apologized, and she talked about the things that she was struggling with. And then it opened up that conversation in a different way. And I wasn't being confrontational, because what I was saying is your feelings are totally legitimate. They're your feelings. I don't understand them. I don't agree with them. I'm baffled. However, I'm happy to hear where that's coming from. I'm at least honoring where you're at. However, you crossed a line, you know, in this way. And so what I'm asking you to do is just, instead of working in that space that's real negative, just walk away from me. And as soon as that conversation occurred, she's like, oh my gosh, that's not at all what I want. And this is what I'm struggling with. And I really love you. And I don't know how to get past this. And then I got to hear her from where she was at.
It sounds like boundaries are also really important to you.
Very.
Like, because what you're describing is this is okay and this is not okay when it comes to being honest and being respectful. But also you talked about how you weren't their buddy, you were their parent. And it made me think about how that's sort of what you were missing. Because in that playing that therapist sort of role with your mom, you just wanted to have a parent who was there and not be their friend or not be their therapist or be the adult in the conversation. And so then that translated to how you parent your own kids, where it's like, I'm the adult, I'm the parent, and you are the kids, and this is what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. You set those rules. And you didn't have that when you were growing up.
I didn't. It wasn't the same. No, it wasn't. And when I see people post, oh, here's my daughter, she's my bestie, she's my best friend, I'm like, she's 7. She needs a life of her own, and you need a life of your own. I think as parents, it's really natural for us to wrap our identity up in our kids. And you're adding parenting to your identity. It doesn't become who you are. And I mean, I didn't want to live vicariously through them. I wanted that. Now, I think I was a super fun parent. I wanted life to be an adventure, and I wanted it to be fun. If we all have a set of rules, and I'm accountable too, so we all have this set of rules, we can have a great time. When you're taking like 8, 9, 12 kids to a restaurant at varying ages, I would park my 15-passenger van.
Oh my God.
And I would look at the kids and just say, and now this is a big deal because it's expensive, and the whole thing is just a production, right? It was really fun, and I loved my life, but it's a production.
Yes.
I would just turn before we got out of the car and say, every one of you knows how to behave. Now you have to make the choice of whether or not you're going to. Anyone who acts up in public will come to the car. When we go home, you'll have peanut butter and jelly. And the kids remember one time, they're like, Taylor got in trouble when we went out to eat one time. And you just looked at him and said, I want mine to go. And you went to the car with him and you went home. See, we can go and have a blast.
Yeah.
If you behave in an appropriate way, you show respect. We can have conversation. We can laugh. We need to keep the volume at a dull roar because there are other people there. But we can have this great time out to eat as long as you are respectful and polite and you know how to behave. So I was always the parent that wanted to have a really good time as long as you were towing the line.
Yes. Yes.
And the second you crossed over that, you were removed. No one else was punished for that.
Yeah.
You were removed. You had peanut butter and jelly at home. You made a choice and you had a consequence. And so I wanted to be the parent that did all these fun things and was upbeat and optimistic, and life was an adventure, and I get lost every time I drive, and it's cool, and we'll just have fun with it. Just don't cross my line. And I'm not your friend.
When you say you're not their friend, what do you classify as being someone's friend? I've heard the same thing that you've heard, right? Like, oh, my kid is my bestie, all that type of stuff. When you hear that, what do you associate that with?
I think maybe the parent living vicariously through the child and what they're doing. I think sometimes it's oversharing information, and maybe this is my perception and it's wrong, but I think you're sharing too much of your adult life and living too much through that child's life. I mean, nobody was more excited when, Brianna was out there playing hockey at 8.
Yeah.
But she didn't play hockey because I wish I had a boy or I grew up playing, or, she just wanted to try it, and we did, and it was fun. I love watching and cheering her on, but I don't hang out with their friends and talk like they do, and I don't identify with their age or where they're at. As they've gotten older, it's different. We're, all of my girls, all of a sudden, we're all like the same size, but we're built differently, so we share clothes and stuff like that, and it's different. They're also adults or nearly adults. I don't sit around and do makeup with them. I'll ask for help doing my makeup, or I'll help them do their hair. But I don't know. There's some separation there for me that maybe I'm definitely not good at pinpointing. There was a movie where the mom dressed like the daughter. It was Mean Girls.
I have not seen that movie, even though it's so popular.
You got to. So it was the cute blonde, and the mom had the tracksuits, and the mom did that. What are you doing? Let your kid be her and you be you. And there are things that overlap, and you can be enthusiastic for each other, and you can have a relationship where you're very open and communicative and you talk, but you're not identifying with each other. There's a generation gap there. And I guess it's because of how I was raised, where I felt like there wasn't a role that was defined, and I didn't have that parent, and I didn't want my kids to feel like they were my therapist or my support, and I didn't want to feel like I was living my life through them, and wearing matching tracksuits. And it's something like that for me.
It also made me think of, and okay, so I might be completely wrong and overstepping here, so please, if I am, just like say so. But from what I'm hearing, it sounded like, your mom got married young and she didn't really get to figure out who she was and have an identity of her own. And her identity was wrapped up in having kids and being a wife and a relationship that sounded sort of complicated. And then when she got divorced, she went through this like almost midlife crisis piece where she was like, well, who am I? I never got to be a person. I never got to figure out who I wanted. And then she sort of went on this binge. She had kids, so then it affected you guys as well, right? And so when you talked about how it's important for you to have an identity outside of your kids, that parenting becomes a part of the identity, but not the identity, I wonder if some of that comes from seeing what happens when it does become the identity and like the backlash that she then sort of went through in that experience.
I think until I was 6, when she and my dad divorced, she was a stay-at-home mom. Like, she sewed. I think she was a really good mom that enjoyed it.
Okay.
And then she went to work when my dad lost his job and he stayed home. I remember very little of this, but I know these are the facts. And they obviously had a very complicated relationship, although I didn't see that. I even asked her once a couple of years ago, like, I don't remember you guys ever arguing. Like, I have no negative memories. And she said, we didn't. You wouldn't remember that. Okay. So their complicated relationship, I did not see that.
It was behind closed doors.
It was, yes. And we were like a normal family doing normal stuff where mom stayed home or dad stayed home and they both worked. Well, I didn't know that there was financial stress or marital stress. I mean, I had no idea. It wasn't like there was screaming
Really?
kids.
Okay.
Right. So that was the interesting thing. That's why I think it was such a dynamic shift. I'm 6. They get divorced. My whole world is turned upside down. My dad moves to a different state. And yes, you are 100% accurate. I really feel like my mom didn't spread her wings. I think it's not important for all of us, but those college years,
yeah,
she was sort of living out, you'd call it a midlife crisis now. And I was very careful about certain things. I've never been a big drinker, never smoked a cigarette. But I was very, very careful. My kids, until they were, almost all of them were close to teenagers, they never even knew that I would drink a beer.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to be that parent. And so I stayed home for 10 years with my kids, and then I went back to work almost 15 or 16 years ago, and I did that balance, and I've gone through divorce. And so I understand that it's difficult, but I never once brought a guy over to my house.
Yeah.
I never once got drunk in front of my kids. I've never, you know what I mean? I'm not doing a line of Coke or smoking weed. I'm not doing that anyway. My adult life was not welcome mixed into my kids. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, I could come to your house, we could have a barbecue and I could have a beer and our little kids are running around. And there isn't anything wrong with that. But my kids just never saw me being an adult. I didn't have this midlife crisis when I got divorced. And I know my mom went through that, and I don't fault her for that.
Yeah.
I understand a little bit about that part of her story. I actually even respect it a little bit because I understand what it's like to have little kids and be in your 20s and be divorced, and I get all that process. What was not okay was that she took it to a much higher level.
Yeah.
And she was a parent.
The thing is, even when you understand something, it doesn't mean you condone that thing. That's not the same thing, right? Like,
Correct.
You can understand something, you can even accept something, but that doesn't mean that it's okay what happened or that it's okay that she made those choices, especially how it affected you, 100%. And I think it's interesting, too, because what I've noticed about being a parent is we know what we experienced. We want something different for our kids. And so often that looks like you overcompensate in certain areas, right? Things that may not be a big deal, but you're like, no, I don't even want to step in that direction because I know where that can go and I don't want that for them. I don't want that for me. So I think every generation, not always the case, but I think what does happen is you try to do one step better. You remember what hurt you and what you felt. And so you try to then create something different for your kids at the same time, trying to figure out what's important to you as an adult and as a person so that you feel respected and valued. So it's really interesting how those lines then weave into how we do things going forward. Next, Jenn talks about another important person in her life, her ex's dad, Jim. For most of her life, Jenn never had a positive male role model. The men in her life were either absent, violent, or abusive. So a relationship with Jim and their deep understanding of each other filled a void that she didn't even know existed.
So I was in my second year of college, and it was my boyfriend. It was his dad. We ended up getting married. I was 19.
Oh, wow.
The relationship only lasted about maybe 3.5 years, but we were very young. My second year of college, I went in Idaho. We met there, and he was from Arizona and wanted me to move down to his parents' house. And in college, I was like, yeah, let's go. Like, sounds great. I don't know why they want this person they don't know to live there. I was 19 when I moved there, and I'm 48. So, I mean, I don't know how they decided it was a good idea for me to come move there. But I moved to his parents' house, and I lived with them for 7 months, but of course I knew them for a lot longer. And Marianne was wonderful, and I loved her. But I remember going into their house, and they were talking about like how much they loved each other. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to figure out the loophole in this. Because honestly, I hadn't seen a really healthy relationship, a couple that had been together for 20 plus years that really loved each other. And so my whole goal, like from almost day one, like I'm going to figure this out. But Jim and I got very close. He was very musically inclined, and I was. He was really funny, and he was the dad I never had.
Yeah.
And I called him dad, and I loved him like dad. From the time I met him, he died 11 years later from when I met him. And like I told you, it was a relief that my father died, and I'm still starting to cry thinking about him passing away. And it was 20 years ago that he passed away. Yeah. But I had 11 years that I was blessed with this man, and I call him my adopted dad because in my mind, I adopt everybody. I've got 18 kids. So I think when you come from a lack of family, and it's really important, it's a value system for me, they did really love each other, and he never remarried. And I mean, he wasn't just the dad I never had. I felt like, you know, when you meet someone that you feel like you've known forever, and he filled this void I didn't even know that I had. Yeah. That I wanted so desperately to have a dad that loved me. And he was one of the most beautiful human beings ever. He had diabetes, so we watched the progression of that disease take him. And I remember he was playing softball with like this youth group and broke his ankle and didn't know it because you don't have feeling in your extremities with diabetes. Yeah. And by the time they figured it out, he ended up getting a leg amputated. And he would make up these songs and sing them about how he had one foot in the grave. I mean, he took every situation. And I was always super optimistic, I think. And he took it to a level where I was like, wow, like you're speaking my language. And I got to have a dad for 11 years. And I was 19. Again, that's another thing. Like later on, I did foster care. And I know I was 19. I was an adult. I was in my second year of college. I graduated high school at 17. I'd been on my own for a couple years. And we were close the whole time. When, you know, their son and I split up, I remained. That was not uncomfortable for anyone. When I took vacations, I went to Arizona to their house. They were Grandma and Grandpa Farley to my kids. And so what a huge difference this man made to a child who's actually an adult. I didn't even realize how much I was missing that until I saw him. And I remember sitting next to him on the bed. He'd check his blood sugar and just leaning into him and feeling like that's what it should be. Yeah. That's what it's like to have a dad. And I got to experience it. And, you know, when he died, I was pissed.
Yeah.
Like,
you gave him to me and you took him.
And then we did a board with pictures of him. Yeah. And when you see somebody, and I wasn't there, but when you see someone every day, it's like if I see you and then I don't see you for a year and I'm like, oh my gosh, your kids, like they grew like 3 feet, you know. Yeah. We don't see the passage of time and the effects it has on people when we're not seeing them all the time, or we see them every day and so we just don't realize. Yeah. And when we laid out the pictures, he had lost both of his legs. We got to kind of step back, separate ourselves, and watch the progression of his disease happen. And then I realized how selfish it was to have wanted him to remain suffering.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to let him go. And how blessed I was that I got 11 years. And so again, I knew you don't have to get a kid at a certain age in foster care. I mean, yes, there are lots of statistics. I could tell you all about it. You can really make an enormous difference. And I was talk about changing. And I don't think that I necessarily made great decisions after that with dating 100%. But I have definitely learned to recognize, and I can't even imagine if you could get that earlier in life, how much different my dating life and my married life and those things could have been.
Yeah.
Because I would have had even stronger foundation. But I don't even have words to express the difference he made in my life and how blessed I feel.
19 is a very interesting age because technically you're an adult, but it's not like you know anything more. 1920s, there's such a tumultuous period of time where you are, again, going through, like, who am I? What do I think? How do I feel? And you feel like you know everything, so it's almost worse because you have this false sense of, like, yeah, I got this, where there's so much you actually don't know. So I think the age part is interesting. But I think the other thing is, no matter how old you get, you want acceptance from your parents, right? And if it's not your actual parent, this man who was a dad to you, when he saw you and was a good role model, you had that relationship, he got you and you got him, like that kinship, it's profound. It doesn't matter how old you are because that piece is always sort of missing until you find somebody like that. And I think the other thing that it does, especially when you're a girl, I think your fathers or the men in your life really set the example for what a relationship could look like in the future. Subconsciously too, like I think we repeat things that we saw or experienced without even realizing that we're doing that. And so not having a strong male role model and then meeting him and being like, Matt, like he's legit. Like this is legitimate. He's not like pretending. They're not faking it. This is a legitimate thing. It exists. And more than that, he loves you. He loved you. He saw you. And you connected, and that's there are no words really to express the profound difference that makes. It sort of makes you feel a little bit more whole. You talked about that void that you didn't even know was there, and like it just gives you a little piece of that, and you feel like complete a little bit inside.
Absolutely. I know also, like you asked about my relationship with my mom, I didn't have much of one with my dad, and those 6 times that I saw him growing up, it was violent. But when I had that, I also realized, my dad could have had that. He could have had that. If he had put down the bottle long enough and set aside his anger, I never did anything to him. There was nothing in my relationship with him that should have become what it was. And when you don't see your own child for a couple of years at a time and then you get to see them, why in the world would you want to make it like this? And he had the choice to make it different. And his addiction or his anger, he allowed that to control everything. He could have had that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for
and
sure.
Didn't. And I had no respect. I sent out a Christmas letter every year. And when Jim died, he died in May. And that Christmas, I said, I lost my adopted father and how hard that was. And my stepmom and my dad were on the mailing list, and I never even thought it. They got that once a year. That was it, this Christmas letter. And my dad called me. If you could be violent over the phone, he was as violent over the phone as you can be. How dare I call another man dad? And I just said, if you had ever acted like one, I wouldn't have needed to find someone else. I hung up. I don't need to subject myself to that,
And he could have taken it the other way. He could have been like, I'm glad you had somebody in your life like that because we didn't have that. In the end, he was thinking about himself. He wasn't thinking about you and what you needed and what was important to you. I understand being a parent is a vulnerable thing too. And, if my kid called someone else mom, I might be like, but I'm your mom, but at the same time, if my son has relationships with other people where he feels as close to them like that, I'm also going to be really happy for him because the more people you have in your life that are positive, that they give you love, that's a good thing. That's what it means to be a parent, that you think about your needs of your kids before the needs of yourself. Balancing so that it's not all about them all the time. But like, I think that's so important. It's kind of like a slap. That phone call, you're in pain and you're trying to honor this man who was beautiful and was such a big part of your life and loved you and cared and everything else. And your biological dad, instead of being happy for you or instead of being understanding or that opening a door to be like, I want that. No, he was mad.
Yeah, he was mad. It was nasty. And definitely that's changed in parenting because I've let my kids know I want you to be able to talk to me about anything. I have a very open door policy. I have nothing off limits. And I will try really hard not to be a disciplinary parent while you are spilling your guts about something that you're going through.
Yeah.
If you're at a party in high school and you're drunk, I do want to get that phone call and I will be the first one to pick you up. Yeah, we're going to have a conversation about that later.
Yeah.
But I want to know. I'm not going to be the person that they're the most comfortable with sometimes. So find people that are, and teachers are kids spend a lot of time with teachers. It's not because I had such a good experience with a teacher. It's really, they're spending more time with teachers than they are with me during the week.
Oh, yeah.
If it's a friend's parent, I'm divorced. So, I divorced years ago, and I was hopeful that if he remarried, I wanted my kids to love that woman. And I wanted her to love my kids. I am not threatened by that. I have my relationship with them. You don't cap out. Well, you could be my friend, but I'm going to have to kick another one out because there's only so much room. We have an ability to love. And so I have never been threatened by that. Yeah. You should be thankful that the man I'm with loves your kids and treats them like his own and would adopt them if something happened to you. You should want that.
Yeah.
And I was hopeful that if he met someone, that would be a person that could be a second mom to my kids. We do not need to be threatened by that. I have never been threatened. And he was engaged twice and, it didn't work out. But I am thankful that I am with someone now who, I had 14 kids and he had 4 and his wife had died. So that's our 8 biological. 4 of them were mine and 4 of them were his. But his first couple kids, he was married and divorced and remarried and she died. So these kiddos went through having a mom that they were close to, a stepmom and a mom, whichever one it was, that they were close to that they lost. And then, he has an ex-wife and she can't stand me and that's fine. She doesn't have to like me at all. But you know what? At some point, you're welcome that I love your kids like my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't treat them like the redheaded stepchild. They are equal in my eyes in every way.
Yeah.
So I don't care that she doesn't like me, and I don't care about any of that because I know that at least the kids, now that they're older, are very grateful that I loved them the same.
Yeah. Yeah. You didn't make them feel other.
No, there was no, oh my gosh. We were getting them from everywhere, so.
You're my kid, and you're my kid, and you're my kid.
The question that bothers me the most is when we have a lot of kids over, we have 12 kids with us, right? And people say, well, which ones are yours? And so I would always just look at my kids and I'm like, hey, which ones of you are mine? And they all raise their hand. And I understand they're trying to differentiate which ones are Dane's biological and which ones are your biological and which ones are adopted, but they are all mine and they are the same. And please do not ask me in front of them which ones are mine, because there is not a single difference between any of them.
Yeah.
So I made a way to make that very natural. And it's a shame that parents don't feel that way, because the person that you should hug is your ex-husband's new wife, quite honestly. And you don't have to be friends with her. You don't have to get along with her, but you should definitely show some respect and hug her and thank her for loving your kids like her own.
Yeah, it's huge. That impact is huge. And if you feel like there's a difference because of who you biologically came from, it makes being a parent a biological thing only when it's not. It doesn't have to be. Obviously that's a part of it for many. But being a parent is so much bigger than that and so much broader than that. You don't have to be related by blood. To be a mom or a dad or to love them, that's not a requirement or compulsory. And I think the other thing that's interesting, so I'm expecting my second kid. So my son is going to be 5 in like a week, and my second son is due at the end of July. So I've talked a lot with my 5-year-old about how there will be another kid, like there's a baby that's coming. But that doesn't mean that my love for you will change, right? I'll get more love. Love is not a pie that you only can give a certain amount of love to each person. Time is like a pie because there's a finite amount of time. So, like, yes, I may not have as much time, but that doesn't mean that I don't love you just as much, right? And I've talked to him a lot about how your brother is going to be different from you, right? And like, even though I might love certain qualities about him, I also love certain qualities about you. The love is the same, but I might recognize different things in each kid. I might love that we like to do this thing together, and with your brother, I might love that we like to do that thing together. But that doesn't mean that I love one more than the other. You know what I mean? It's the same, equal. And so, I mean, he's 5, so I always like, I don't know how much of this he's digesting, but I'm gonna keep saying it and hoping that certain things stick. But they're both same parents, right? Biologically. But still, I worry that one might feel more than the other. And then when you have a case where it's a blended family and there's kids who are adopted, I think that's even more heightened, the possibility for that to happen. And so unless you make a deliberate effort for that not to be the case, people end up feeling that. It's so easy to feel othered. And it's the worst when it's in your own household that you feel othered. Stay tuned for next week's episode where we continue our conversation with Jenn and really talk about how she took control of her own life and her own narrative. The quote that I mentioned earlier this week actually applies more to next week's episode. The quote was, "I'm not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become," by Carl Jung. So Jenn leads us through how she is creating new traditions while giving a place for her past trauma to live, but not letting it control her life. For this episode, my question to everyone is, who has played a substantial role in your life that really influences how you see the world? Sometimes there's life events, but sometimes there's people who really make a difference, both in positive and negative ways. So tell me about who's changed you and how have they impacted you. So you can do this by reaching out to me over Instagram at This Is You Podcast. Send me a message on Facebook. Or if you're interested in being featured on our blog, which will be featured during the off season from August to December of this year, then you can actually apply to be featured. So if you want to learn more, go on our website, www.thisisyoupodcast.com, and go to share your story, and you can read about the different ways that you can share your experience. Or if you want to go directly to the application, there is a shortened link. You can go to bit.ly/thisisYouBlog to apply. So I hope to hear from you guys, and I really look forward to hearing your stories. Until next time, take care.